Hey everybody, this is Eli with Elfbait, and so it's Sunday morning here, and I'm up bright and early, starting to try and prep for the first session for my Sunday game, which is the game fifth edition game I'm running for my wife and my daughter, my nephew, and some of their friends. And this is running parallel to the Monday game. In fact, it's in the same setting, or same world as the Monday game. But that's not what this video is about. I decided I would jump on and kind of address a subject that a friend of mine had brought up. And it's kind of an interesting one for starting DMs, and I thought it was kind of worth chatting on a bit. So what he had asked is, do I have, when I'm setting up a game world, when I'm setting up a new campaign setting, do I have an end game in mind? And the answer for me, and actually let me clarify, by end game, does the campaign itself or the campaign world have some sort of, for lack of a better term, win scenario? Or end scenario, because I guess the end game could be a loss for the players if not handled well. For me, the answer on this is usually no. I don't like to make settings that have a definite ending. Now, within a campaign arc, there might be an end game, but I don't usually design these into my settings unless the setting is heavily themed. If I am running a campaign that has a definite purpose, yeah, sure. I will definitely go ahead and run, some sort of end game, working the players up to it. But I find that those are best kept, at least in my experience, as something that is maintained on a shorter scale, a smaller scale, during an arc for a campaign. You may go through several adventures without anything pre-established as far as an end game. Then the campaign arc, the one of the main stories or a meta plot, falls on the party, or they discover it, and now they are involved in this greater plot, and they will see that plot through to whatever end they do. That said, that could be a few adventures. It could be definitely something that along the lines of an entire month's worth of play, and certainly the industry is publishing those campaign settings and those things that could really make it to where you can run your game along a long span and ultimately come down to something at the end that really rewards the players. The worry for me though is, if I build an end game into the campaign, is that end game going to end up being all there is to the campaign? Once the players have fulfilled this, the I don't know, whatever that end game is, victory, defeat, discovery, is there enough staying power? Or is there going to be enough interest after that end game is over? So what I like to do is to build a general connection with the world first, that is separate from these end games, even though elements of a greater plot might be woven into those adventures, and then put the end game into the game afterwards, or after those few, or even a long introductory span of adventures. In one campaign I did back, kind of post high school, pre-marriage, kind of, I guess you could call it the bachelor days, and then into my early 30s. So that in that campaign setting, that was a campaign world that had existed since high school. It had kind of slowly been built up organically by my best friend and I at the time, and we just kind of built it over time, and we kept running our individual games in that setting, and I eventually came to this turn in the game where the world had been so big, I'd run so many campaigns in it, I felt it was time for a world-changing event. Now, unfortunately, that campaign never went to fruition, nor do I think that we'll really revisit that campaign again. So I feel okay freely speaking on what was going on. But in this particular setting, there was a doom clock on the world, as they knew it, at least. So in a few adventures they had met. In some of the adventures leading up to this, the party had run into some races and some other factions in the world who were aware of this pending doom, and they were working towards getting to the center of it and gathering allies. The doom in question was a chunk of a mind flare world that had split off. In my universe, I decided that the mind flare homeworld had been destroyed, but in a truly fantastic way, that mind flare world was now hurtling in chunks through space with parts of the mind flare society still intact on it. So this huge chunk of black purplish planet was heading towards the campaign world, and only a few species, a few factions, a few races on the fantasy world had evidence of that. There was, and these were races that had found ways to look beyond their particular prime material out into the ether between worlds. And so this would have been the end game. Had the player succeeded, had the party succeeded, who knows where that would have gone exactly. It may have been one of the situations where there was no way to stop, the chunk of the planet hitting the campaign world and then doing what it was going to do. I had decided that it wasn't going to be a sciencey type effect. I mean, certainly a huge chunk of another planet hitting another world is likely to, in real physics terms, end life on that world. But this is fantasy and this is magic, and so I decided that it was going to be something more akin of, this chunk of the mind flare planet would hit the campaign world and create this giant, peak of a subcontinent from where the evil of the mind flayers would spill out. And actually, as the game progressed, and there were incursions. I was playing in the setting where the Gith were still under the thumb of the mind flayers and were willingly working with the mind flayers, or at least some of them. And so these Gith were astrally, going ahead. The mind flayers were aware of where they were going, and so these Gith were appearing in various spots and causing kind of as a precursor force, scouting force ahead of time. So I guess in essence, I was doing a sort of an alien invasion scenario in a fantasy setting. But as an example of working an endgame in, the endgame, of course, there would have been dealing with the mind flayer threat. But it's also an example, I think, of an event that would kind of end a game. And seeing as that campaign had been running for literally decades, in one form or another, I didn't feel bad, doing an end game for the world. But for this particular party, this particular group of players, I suppose it would have been bad. But it's only as bad as any D&D group is. I mean, you can always move on to another setting and to another campaign arc. But yeah, so as an example of working an end game in there over time, that is one. Now, recently I also worked on another campaign setting, and I certainly hope to play it at some point, but I kind of side tabled that for a bit, wanting to get back into the groove before I tried to dive into something. In the campaign I set up for Valderia, which is sort of a Renaissance-y Age of Discovery game, that game has in it heavy theme elements that could be played out to an ultimate end. There is an Age of Discovery element. Valderia has reached the edges of its border, the practical limits to its expansion, and it needs to find new places to expand into for growth, because at this point it's kind of stagnating. But at the same time, there is also some upheaval within the Empire because of the stagnation. There have been some. There are definitely a lot of different directions and end games that you could achieve. I mean, in that story arc or in that setting, there's a big sub thread of the nature of magic and how it's dealt with by society. It's very much guild based and it's strictly enforced, but yet there's an element of folks wanting freedom. There's a conflict with the plight of the Black Bloods, which are are orcs that live in and among the humans in Valdaria. What is the fate of the Black Bloods? That could be an arc too as well. I mean, are they going to ever be brought to the same status as the citizens that they live alongside? So, kind of back on to the into more general terms, if you're going to write an end game in, I feel it's worth either being aware up front that this is. And excuse me, I got a bit of a frog. Somebody brought a nasty bug into work. But it's worth, I think, exploring whether or not you want to have this end game be the end of the campaign, or is it just the end of a story arc? And be aware of that and commit to that up front, but still leave a door open. Your players are going to surprise you, and so as a DM, you have to be ready for the fact that even though you wrote your end game to be world changing, maybe after that the party themselves, the players, maybe they see certain questions unanswered that they'd like to explore. This is going to make things easy for you as a DM. It may sound hard. It's like I had this great plan, and then suddenly all my players want to go off and do something else after it's over. I expect it to be done. I'm not ready. Well, that's fine. You can take a break, prep for that next arc, taking your cues from your players. Play a couple of side games, sort of a grounding adventure back to basics, or maybe a little side jaunt onto some other campaign setting with some new characters for a bit. But listening to your players is certainly going to help you out with how that ends. I mean, if they get done and they're just spent, either it was a slog and they really ground and they're just done with that plot line. No more mind flayers. I don't want to see another mind flayer in my entire life, or maybe it was really rewarding, but it was very draining. I mean, depending on how your campaign goes, your players could be invested in it enough to where they're just like, dude, I need a breather. I want to go kill goblins. Can we go dungeon crawling again? And that's fine. I mean, run some dungeon crawls for a while. But if you're going to run an end game from the beginning, know that it could have an effect on your campaign. If you're going to run end games that would work their way into an existing campaign or in shorter campaign arcs, it's worth taking a moment to think about how you're going to fit those in. You don't want them to feel forced. Plant seeds out there, and if your players don't bite at them, fine. You can have the end game scenario, the storyline, the meta plot working behind the scenes, and have that affect other things. And either your players are going to get interested or not, but don't freak out if they don't. This is just your players doing what players do, and that's going into the undrawn part of the dungeon. I mean, there's been countless comics and cartoons drawn about that part of the dungeon where it's unmapped and the party wants to go there. Just a moment. Coffee. Anyways, so, and then if they still never bite, it's not to be. Have it work itself out, or have it just continue in the background. Either another opportunity is going to present itself down the run, and you're going to be able to go ahead and work it in, or you just shift gears. Maybe that particular plot unfolds, and the next time the players, the party is involved in some aspect of their adventuring life that was status quo before all of this happened, they may find out that it's done with, and it's been forever changed, and they missed the boat. Be careful with that. You don't want them feeling like they're being railroaded or that they're being punished, but it could help to reinforce this idea that, hey, there's stuff going on. It's worth paying attention and maybe jumping on some of these. I think one of the big failings with a lot of D&D groups or gaming groups in general is that concession that we're all here to adventure. And, the way I always put it, if Bilbo never leaves the Shire, Lord of the Rings never happens. Well, it might, but ultimately you have to take that step out the front door, and you have to be willing to sometimes act outside of the best interests of a rational being to have adventure. Certainly, that is going to be one of your biggest enemies when you're trying to work a greater plot, because those greater plots and those end games may seem way bigger than the players. I think it's also important if you're going to run a meta plot like that or an end game that you do find ways to make the players, not the characters. I mean, you have to. I mean, appealing to the characters is important too, but the characters aren't going to do anything if the players don't feel that they have a chance. Unless you have some real risk takers in your game, and that's awesome if you do, because those folks are worth their weight in gold or electrum if you're using old school money. But so they have to feel that they can take it on. Revealing plot points that are within their grasp early on is a great way to build up to that. Let your bad guys fail every once in a while. If your bad guys fail, and I mean not not through just throwing the players a bone, but if the bad guys are not unstoppable from the beginning, it will let your players and the party build up a momentum, and they'll feel that they can take things on, and it'll build them up, build up their confidence, so where they're going to feel that they can really address the threat that you're putting in front of them. So, this nothing planned here, so this is kind of an impromptu video, but really, I mean, end game plots are certainly good and bad. It's like so much stuff in gaming, so much stuff in D&D and everything else that you're going to do tabletop. There's no right or wrong way. It's just, the best way that you can conceive of can end up being the wrong way. And really, if you're committed to it, then I think your players will also be committed to it, but you have to find a way to commit to it that pulls them in. But also, again, be aware that it could change your game forever. It could change your game world forever. If you have to, I mean, you still have to be prepared for the heroes to fail. And that's, I think, kind of just to jump in with one last point. If you're not ready for your heroes to fail, that's going to really hurt your campaign setting, because you have to be prepared. I mean, in my case, from the example earlier, if that chunk of the Mind Flayer homeworld hits the campaign setting and they can't stop the threat, I have to deal with, as a DM, a world full of Mind Flayer threat now, and so do the players. So that's either going to end my game or it's going to change it forever. Now, they could be good or bad, and you don't know until you get there, but be prepared for it. So yeah, end games, there's nothing wrong with them. They can sort of pigeonhole your game if you're not careful. They can sometimes turn out in ways that you didn't plan for or didn't want, but there's nothing wrong with them. It all comes down to prep, a willingness to listen to your players and to read your players, and also to allow for the right build-up, so nobody feels that they're being thrown into something, or unless that's the point. I mean, sometimes being thrown into something is great drama. You can run. We've all seen the villagers who suddenly find themselves thrust into something bigger than themselves, and they have no choice but to do it. That's cool. That can be but that is sort of the end game. That's sort of building it from the beginning. An established party is going to take maybe a little bit more doing. They've seen it, they've done it, they know that this leads to this and all of that. So, yes, end games are yes and no for me. I tend to not run them in general, but I have run them as shorter campaign arcs. I find that they work best that way. Anyways, that is sort of my blah 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 on end games. And so, if you have questions or comments, or you need me to clarify anything, certainly post them in the comments below. Subscribe and share. If you're enjoying these videos, please let folks know about Elfbait. And I promise I'm going to do some sort of a video in the future telling a little bit more about where that name comes from, and a little bit more about me. We're seven videos in, and I don't think I remembered to properly introduce myself, and I do apologize. I initially started making these videos sort of expecting my audience to be people that I knew already, but I am getting some folks on the subscriber list who I don't know, or don't who may not know me as well as others, from the years spending just babbling on various threads and forums and stuff. So if you're enjoying it, let me know. Let me know what you think, and if you have questions, any question, even if it's not related to the particular video, I'm checking the comments. So if you have a question that came to mind that may not necessarily have anything to do with this video or any other video, put it below, and I'll address it. And certainly, we're now 2 videos that have come out of questions from other folks out there, from other players. And so that's a good way to keep this going. I can only think of so many things, and I'll keep doing my campaign recaps, for the various games. I'm going to try and do one each for both the Sunday and Monday games. If that becomes a little too much, I may just do a group recap, or I may space them out and only do important things. But I think, being that they're both first level games, I wanted to kind of put in that early experience for those folks who may be tuning in to sort of see what this is about. Have a good day, folks, and go out and game. Thanks.